Hi, everybody. Welcome. Rashanda, you there?
I'm here. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm really excited to have this important conversation and panel tonight.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. Rashanda, do you remember this song, We Are Family? Is it before?
I remember hearing it growing up, but
All right.
let's not date me.
All right. That might be a little bit more thing. Okay, so I'm really pleased. My name is Dan HoSang. I'm with the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective and a teacher educator. I also work at Yale. Rashanda is another member of the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective Steering Committee and is the executive director of Students for Educational Justice. We're gonna be your co-moderators and just spend a little bit of time kind of helping orient you. We got a fun poll ready, and then we're gonna hear from this great, fantastic panel. You ready, Rashanda?
I'm ready. Go ahead and launch it.
What do you think about the turnout today?
It's amazing. We have over 175 people on right now.
Yeah.
And I see a few more trickling in. Some are in the waiting room.
Yeah, so it's really exciting
to
think about all this together. All right, so I think, let's see. Should we do the poll, Rashanda, first?
Yeah. So we have a question for you all. We just want to know what brings you to this webinar today. Are you new to critical race theory and anti-racist teaching? Are you here because you're opposed to critical race theory? Are you here because you want to disrupt this webinar? We just want to get an idea of what, folks, what have driven folks to this webinar tonight. So we'll give you all a few minutes to answer the questions.
All right, I'm seeing them coming in, Rashanda.
Oh, you might want to give another minute or two.
We're gonna give another minute for sure.
Yeah, a few people just joined us.
Yeah, but it's great to see where folks are at with this question, because a lot of this is new for so many of us. So it's good that we're trying to think about what's at stake here. What do you think? Another 10 seconds? We're almost
sure.
Yeah, almost got everyone in. All right.
And I see some introductions taking place in the chat, so that's great.
Yeah. Folks from all over the state. That's amazing. All right. We ready? We're good, Rashanda?
I actually closed the results by accident, so you might have to read them for us.
All right. I think there it goes. So what do you have it there in front of you, Rashanda?
I see, yeah. So, all right, we have 21% of the people are just completely new and want to learn more about anti-racist education and critical race theory. And then we have the majority of people who are familiar with critical race theory, 77%, and anti-racist education, but want to know how to join others to defend it. And then just a small number 3 think that they may be opposed to critical race theory and anti-racist education, but are open to learning more. So that's great. I'm glad to hear we don't have any disruptors, but very, very happy to be able to engage with you all in this conversation, especially those who are interested in learning more and those who, want to join others to defend it.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's great to have so many kind of folks who are trying to think about all of these questions. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna just say something very quickly because we really want to get to our panel there. So I'll just say something very, very quickly here about what we have in store today. So I'll first just say the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective is building a community of youth organizers, students, teachers, teacher educators who are really committed to advancing anti-racist pedagogy, curriculum, and practice within K-12 public schools across the state. Today's panel, it's our 5th webinar we've done in the past year. We're really pleased to welcome 2 fantastic teachers, Daisha Brabham and Kristin Mendoza. Daisha from Norwalk Public Schools, Kristin is at Wilbur. We'll then turn to 2 really great students, Andrea Walker, Drea, a youth organizer with Hearing Youth Voices in New London, and Tenzin Dhondup, who is at Naugatuck High School and a member of the Naugatuck Equity Alliance. Then it's time to hear from the parents. So we'll hear from Jorgieliz Casanova, a parent in New Haven Public Schools, and finally, a building leader, Meredith Gavrin, co-founder of the New Haven Academy. So the idea here is that in so much of this debate, Rashanda, right, it's like we keep losing out on the voices of like actual teachers and parents and students. Yeah. That's what we're going to get here, and that's, you know, what's really exciting. We just want to like very quickly say, and I think we're going to be good here, that we're just looking forward to respectful and engaged listening and exchange. We at the ARTLC say we're all teachers, we're all learners, we can make mistakes, we can learn from one another, we can do it in respectful ways, and we can disagree. Rashanda, even you and I disagree sometimes, huh?
Absolutely, yes, I agree. That we disagree.
We disagree. We disagree a lot, you know, not just you and I, but there, and that's part of what we're going to talk about.
So, as we get started, Dan, I want to ask a question. As the professor in this conversation, what is critical race theory, and why are we hearing so much about it right now?
Okay. All right. So we should do a little bit of that, right? We should do talk a little bit about what some people are going to come with questions, and it's something for us to get ahead. All right, Rashanda, I promise I'm going to do this like really quick version. Okay. I'm going to keep it really simple. We're going to talk about what critical race theory is, and and a little what connection it has to do with anti-racist education. Okay. You got my screen, right, Rashanda?
Yes, I do.
All right. Okay. Here we go. Look, Rashanda, what is critical race theory? We were ready for this question. All right. I just want to invite folks to just, you know, a couple of things we might take home and take away from this question. Just to situate what critical race theory is, since it's a term that's come up in this debate a lot. This was first explored by students. I really want to just emphasize this point. It's students who entered law schools and other graduate schools and just higher ed in the 1970s and 1980s. And we're just going to listen to a little bit of what they had to say about this after the passage of major civil rights laws. So after the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, after Brown v. Board of Ed, school desegregation, the idea was that the laws had been passed to eliminate racism. And here's some of their faces, but we have to imagine them, Rashanda, as like young 22-year-olds. You know, they were often the first in their families to go to college, indeed law school. You know, these new opportunities have been opened up. And you can see they were multiracial. They came from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, but they had it, you know, teachers, educators, we often start with essential questions. What are we all trying to think about and get to? They had an essential question, and that was this. Why has racial inequality, and this is, you know, in the 70s, 80s, you know, the 90s, persisted, in some cases gotten worse, within a system that's premised on equal rights and fair treatment under the law? And it was a question they were coming with. We have all these civil rights laws passed, and yet we see these really, really profound and sustained levels of racial inequality. How do we understand and explain it? The second thing that they really thought about was a shared commitment to what they called, in their terms, an ethical commitment to human liberation. That what the idea was, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to study, and I want to use my study for the purposes of liberation. Did they disagree with one another? All the time. But they engaged in a kind of collective practice to think about what this new moment was and how it could be used to think about freedom for themselves, for their communities, place. Okay, are we good so far, Rashanda?
Absolutely.
All right, 3 more minutes, here I go. I want to just share a couple of quick quotes here from some of the founders. This is Mari Matsuoda, who's a professor of law at the University of Hawaii and a really important early contributor to critical race theory. And she writes, the problem is not bad people. That was never the problem. They're not interested in figuring out who's good or bad. The problem is a system that reproduces bad outcomes. It is both humane and inclusive to say, we have done things that have hurt all of us, and we need to find a way out, finding a way out from the hurt. Okay, so I just want to say that that's the initial orientation of critical race theory. And then she writes, critical race theory is a method that takes the lived experience of racism seriously, using history and social reality to explain how racism operates. And I think this is the part, you know, that I'm moved by, toward the end of eliminating the harmful effects of racism and bringing about a just and healthy world for all, for everybody, okay? thinking about discrimination as a way to produce a kind of wider sense of freedom for everyone. And just the last one here, just because I think it's important for us to hear about this body of work in the words of the folks that are actually developing it. This is Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal theorist and writer who's also connected to this. And she says, you know, look, I see my work as talking back against those who would normalize and neutralize intolerable conditions in our lives. So the material conditions in our lives. Social justice writing, scholarship, activism talks back against systems of thought, against the assumptions, against the power that has lined up throughout history to tell us some of us are not worthy of being full citizens. Some of our dreams are not worthy of being realized. Some of our lives are not worthy of improvement through collective conditions to change the terms upon which we live. So about changing the terms we live. What do you think about this, Rashanda?
Yeah, you know, I am a huge fan of Kimberly Crenshaw, let me first say that. And I think my first introduction to critical race theory was actually during my own study of the law. And I remember reading something that Kimberly Crenshaw had said. She notes that critical race theory is not a noun, but a verb. It cannot be confined to a static and narrow definition. It's considered to be evolving and malleable. It's a practice. It critiques the social construction of race and institutionalized racism, institutionalized racism, perpetuate a racial caste system that relegates people of color to the bottom tiers. And so critical race theory recognizes that race also intersects with other identities, including sexuality and gender identity and others. And it acknowledges that racism is not, you know, a thing of the past. Instead, it acknowledges that the legacy of slavery and segregation and the imposition of second-class citizenship on Black Americans and other people of color continue to permeate the fabric of society. And so it's really just acknowledging all of these things that play a role on the systems that exist today.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. I think it's so helpful. That's such a great takeaway for us to think of it as an act, a process, something we do, not a body that's taught. Mm-hmm. I want to get us to our panel. So I'll just say this. There is lots and lots of work out there that we encourage everyone to read about critical race theory in education. It's been there for a long time. Right. None of it mentions humiliating anyone, putting anyone down, you know, and we really encourage folks to read it for what it is there. But lots and lots of work about how these have shaped many, many parts to strengthen teaching so that teaching works for everyone. And just the last part on this is to say that critical race theory is connected to other kinds of anti-racist work in the classroom. Anti-bias, anti-racist work, culturally responsive teaching, diversity, equity, inclusion. They're all not the same, but they all share a kind of similar commitment of thinking about how schooling is a site of freedom for people, for all of us, and opening and possibility.
Thank you.
I'm going to just do one slide here now before we turn to our panel to say, you know, the question then has become, if this is what critical race theory is, why does it have this kind of just heavy negative connotation these days? And I'll just say very quickly, you know, a writer, this guy, Chris Rufo, last September appeared on the Tucker Carlson show. He claimed that critical race theory was taking over the government. Mark Meadows, the chief of staff for President Trump at the time, was watching, called Rufo right away. Within a week, there was an order banning critical race theory from all portions of the government. Within 6 months, purporting to ban critical race theory. By May, Steve Bannon, the kind of strategist, said the path to save the nation is very simple. It's going through the school boards. And Rashanda, look at this. This is on Fox News. This is mentions of critical race theory from February 2021. It was really never mentioned before that until June. So you can see in just this short period of time how it is just inflamed in this way.
Right.
And it was very, very clear that what they were trying to do was put into the public conversation, we're going to turn this word toxic and put all of the various cultural values and the brand. So that was really the texture. You can see here they've engaged in lots and lots of public education and political education. This is from a conservative group in Texas, trying to train parent activists in how to so-called spot identify critical race theory. Look at all the terms they're, arguing in favor of. And so we shouldn't be surprised that at that point, it unleashed sets of parents who were pressing these same points. So the point is, this is a democratic society and people are free to kind of express their ideas and values and commitments, but it's also helpful for us to know where this came from and the kind of money and organization and power that are behind it. And the very last thing I'll say is that our state hasn't been exempted from this. There's been local activism in Easton and Reading and Guilford, an attempt to pass something at the state. So it's hit home for us as well. All right. How did I do, Rashanda?
I think we're doing well on time. Thank you for sharing. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time.
It was a lot.
You did very well. Thank you.
I hope it was helpful. Okay, should we turn to our panel now?
All right. Let's see.
All right. So maybe I can start. I'll welcome in Daisha and Chris. And how are you, Daisha?
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. Excited.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and how are you doing, Chris?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today.
Great. Okay. So good to be in conversation with both of you. So I'll just start with the first question, and Rashanda, then turn over to you. Okay. So, in the recent debate about critical race theory, anti-racist education, we really haven't heard many voices of teachers. So could you start just by telling us, what are your goals for your students when it comes to thinking and talking about race and racism? What are you trying to do in your class? Daisha, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. I think the first thing that when I think about what my goals are for my students in my classroom is, especially as a history teacher, is I'm really asking my students to develop a deeper understanding of the world around them. I'm asking them to think deeper about different concepts, about different events that they have experienced or that they've heard about, to really help them to gain a critical understanding of those events. And I'm also just asking them to really develop their voices so that they can speak out against injustice that they see. So those are kind of the goals that I'm going for. I'm not sure if Chris has similar goals, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I do. My context is a little maybe more specific. I work with newly arrived students who are learning English. So all my students are recently arrived and are in their beginning of their process of learning English. And I think the first goal I have is really about building English skills, and it's because it's the language of power and because of the access that English will provide, in whatever their goals are in their lives. So there's kind of a practical, we've got to, get as far as we can with this language in the few years I have with them before they graduate. And then I also think about language and access a lot, in the sense that I want them to have access to everything that our school has to offer, which often means a lot of access to translation, interpretation with families, and just making sure that all the spaces are equally available to my sort of subset of students. And sometimes that's a big job. So I think about those things a lot, and I would say a sense of community, a sense of belonging and relationships, and like, this is also my school. That's a thing I think about too a lot, working with newly arrived students.
Thank you. I was wondering if you all could give us some specific examples of how you do that, like how you engage in anti-racist teaching in the classroom to support the students that you work with.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm going to formally introduce myself. My name is.
We're going to go to Daisha first, I think.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen really quick of just strategies that I was thinking about when prepping for this event. And I think some of the ways that I've kind of done this in my classroom is really to call on my students to answer those hot questions. We hear that a lot in education. How are we going to get our students to that higher order thinking or higher order thinking questions? And so asking them essential questions that really call them to, again, deepen their understanding of certain events. So for example, I teach Constitution's honors and civics and US history. And so some examples of questions might be, instead of just saying, well, what happened during this particular case? Well, what does this particular case tell us about the relationship between society and law? What is this case telling us about the meaning of how the law constructs or does not construct race? And also providing students a space where everyone can contribute. I'm a firm believer that everyone should be able, this is not something that's for a certain level of students or certain this, it's everyone can contribute to this discussion. Another important thing is incorporating resistance. I know that the Anti-Racist Teaching Collective, this is something that's been drilled in consistently, incorporating resistance at every stance. So for example, if you're teaching the Chinese exclusion law, then making sure that you amplify Sum Sumbo's letter, fighting back against that law and speaking out against it. And also importantly, amplifying student voices. Life is complex and nuanced, and the classroom should really be no different. And allowing students to share their own experiences. One thing that I think I notice a lot, I think the dominant notion is that anti-racist teaching is only for Black students or students of color. It's for all students need to engage in this. In the same way that many Black students or students of color may feel overwritten or left out of the term Blackness, a lot of white students or people who identify as white students will also feel left out by whiteness. So offering people to, again, be able to share their own experiences. The last two are just teaching the impact. A lot of times, especially in history, we focus on specific events, but we won't talk about what happened after. We'll talk about Brown versus Boer, but we won't talk about the years of parents taking their students out of schools following that legislation. We'll talk about the Great Migration of African Americans moving up north, but we won't talk about the redlining and the cultural, the discrimination that followed that. So being able to talk about what is the impact of racism in its historical sense, but also in the present, and making sure to draw those connections. And also most importantly, and I think the most important part is offering students self-reflection, offering students the space to digest and reflect on their own experiences through identity charts, do nows, exit tickets, journal activities. Students should constantly be able to develop their voice and develop how the content means, what the content means to them. Because again, that's gonna create give them the opportunity to become lifelong learners. That this is stuff that they're gonna take out of your classroom in addition to practicing it within. So those are kind of just some tips on what I do in my classroom to kind of foster this type of environment.
Thank you, Daisha. I think, you make some really, really important points, amplifying student voice and especially amplifying the resistors. It's not always about the harm, but we want to celebrate those who have been, leading the torch and resisting, these cultural norms and practices. And then, of course, the self-reflection is also really important. I have a question for, if there's enough time for both of you. The question is, as a teacher, what would you say to school leaders and other administrators about the support that teachers need at this moment? And what concrete steps can they take to make sure that you have the conditions that you need to teach in this way?
And maybe we could turn to Chris first for that one.
Sure, thank you. So I think, we've been talking about structures a lot, and I think looking at the big picture of the whole building, I work at a big comprehensive high school that historically has not served all populations equally. And so I would say, where are the places where we can push better access for everyone to all that the school has to offer? A specific example that comes to mind for me is the early college entrance program that we have at New Haven at different high schools, where students can in their junior and senior year enroll at Gateway, Southern, even Yale in some cases. And in the past, that had always been a program for the kids who had already exhausted all the AP classes by junior year, a certain very small subset of students. And the last few years, we've been asking, why aren't we opening these classes to the language learners? Why can't they get some more ESL credits under their belt? Why can't we get them in there at Gateway so that the transition becomes smoother for them, and they, have early access to that environment? So I think looking at the way things have been done in the past and seeing where there are opportunities to do it differently. And then I think that also, that example is about students, but for the teachers as well, we need structures where we feel like we are in community with one another, where we are in community with our students. I think teachers need a lot more information and opportunities to network with the communities that they are serving. An example that was in the news of Wilbur Cross just before the pandemic was the case of Mario, our student who was in deportation proceedings and was locked up in Massachusetts. I think a big part of why we were successful in, and when I say we, I primarily mean the students with the teachers and kind of a support role. The reason we were successful at getting Mario home from detention, I think, really was because we had this foundational network of, we knew who to call. We knew some lawyers. We knew the different nonprofit organizations. We knew people in the undocumented community. And the students felt like they could come to us and even tell us initially what had happened to Mario. So I think the more teachers have an opportunity to kind of build that network and build those relationships, then if, unfortunately, there probably will be another crisis like that at some point, then the relationships are in place and you can kind of jump into action and do what you need to do.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I'm really hearing there about about all the proactive work you're talking about to develop those relationships. And just, a quick note that in states where these laws have passed and equity work is banned, a lot of what you're describing would at least be subject to litigation, to complaints, to potential termination of teachers. So I just want to be clear, the basic equity work that Chris is talking about here, to be able to advocate students their right to education, where their programs are serving them equitably, all of that is captured under many of these bans. It's not just limited to the curriculum. And so thinking about what we need to do actively to protect those is so important. Daisha, can we just turn to you for that last question? In this time when these complaints are coming, what do teachers need from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm just going to share my last slide. I think most importantly, we're better as a collective. I really truly believe that we're better together. And so anti-racist teaching really should not be isolated to one teacher. It shouldn't be isolated to one department or even at one school, but rather we need to cultivate an environment in which all are tasked with the process of engaging in this work. I think that oftentimes so much heat is really felt by one particular person, or something happens. I remember in January having a conversation with the social studies teacher in my department whenever we had to talk about the what happened in January at the Capitol, that we all texted and said, okay, well, everyone's going to look to us as history teachers. This is something that should be across departments. So I think that that's the key. I think also providing deep and meaningful and consistent areas of professional development for all staff. Oftentimes, if you have a PD on cultural relevancy or understanding anti-racist bias or dealing with bias, it's kind of a one-off. It should be something that's consistent so that everyone's engaged. Providing teachers a space to create, innovate, and develop lessons and units that are meaningful and based on their experience and expertise. Teachers know what we're talking about. We are doing the work. And so asking us, talking to us, providing us spaces to really take the lead and share our expertise with staff, with parents. I think that's important. And lastly, providing support for teachers of color to not only recruit, but retain. So many districts right now are asking, how do we get teachers of color? How do we get teachers of color? The real question is, how do we get them in the door and keep them? And that's through providing them an environment in which they feel as if they're supported in the work that they're trying to engage in and really seen as experts or really taken for all the talents and what they bring to the classroom. And then lastly, amplifying student and teachers' voices. This isn't just teachers who want this, your students want it as well. Students are also calling it, so amplifying their voices at every opportunity, I think are some of the key takeaways of how we can support teachers in this work.
Thank you. That actually leads us to the next part of the program, which is our youth organizing and student activism. So I wholeheartedly agree in the importance of amplifying students' voices. And with that, Drea, I'm coming to you. Drea, you've been a longtime leader of Hearing Youth Voices in New London. And I was wondering if you could give us your perspective as a student about what your vision is for how race and racism should be addressed in the curriculum.
Yes, so my perspective, well, first off, I'm gonna start off by introducing myself. My name is Andrea Walker. I'm 19 years old and I am a leader of Hearing Youth Voices. I wanna make sure y'all can hear me as well.
We're good. We can't quite see your face fully.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Drea.
Camera off my angle camera. So I wanna start off by saying one thing. I don't believe that you can celebrate and honor your achievements without honoring and remembering the failures that and the lessons that you learned and attempting to reach your achievements. So for me, like, I've noticed that as a country, we celebrate and we take great pride in all it is that we have achieved, all the while actively erasing and or ignoring or undermining all of the failures that we have had as a country and in the ways that we have failed our people as a country are many. And I'm also a firm believer in the fact that critical race, the way race and racism should be taught in schools, should be with complete honesty. And I don't think brutality is the right word, but to actively express with just complete honesty, no filtrations, no sugarcoating. We have actively sugarcoated a lot of the horrors of the actions that we have committed. And as a result, people like me and others who also share my skin complexion, who are Black American in this country, have been failed in so many ways. So many of our experiences, the things that have happened to us in general, whether it be the experiences of redlining or just the ignorance that has been created as a result of not teaching the actual accurate histories.
Wow, yes, very insightful. And I think, powerful. Your words are very powerful. Tenzin, I want to give you the opportunity to answer the same question. Can you give us your perspective about what your vision is for how race and racism should be addressed in the curriculum?
Yeah, adding on to what she said about having that level of honesty when addressing race and racism, I think that one of the things that holds back those important conversations is the fact that when we're catering our lessons and curriculum, the question of who or what kinds of students the lessons are being written for aren't truly asked. So, like, to be completely blunt, it seems as though Andrea, as she was saying, about how like there's this whitewashing of history, of watering it down. If you think about it, it's to make it palatable for white students, because on one hand, I can empathize with how uncomfortable it might make you to learn of your past, and to learn not of your past. I'm speaking as if like of the past, and people that share your skin color that have done things to other people. But I can empathize with the level of discomfort that raises. But on the other hand, when we reduce history down to things that can fit into neat bullet points on a board and not necessarily speak to the as Andrea was saying, the horrors and atrocities committed against human beings, we do leave a great bit of it of that discussion out. But I also think that as I believe Daisha was saying about having that level of collaboration and sharing diverse perspectives to make sure that when we're making curriculum about race and racism, we aren't excluding anyone, and to emphasize that this curriculum is meant for all students, not just, as she was saying, like Black students, not just students of color, but everyone. But with that, I do think that those uncomfortable but honest conversations about history and the present need to be addressed.
Yeah, I think, you both make some really important points by sort of whitewashing history so that it's more palatable. It only does more harm to those who have been, harmed through, racism and white supremacy. And so, yeah, it just sort of perpetuates the problem that you seek to eliminate.
Yeah. And I'm also just appreciating, because what you're talking about is like more complexity. We want more complexity. We don't want bullet points. We don't want sugarcoat. We want complexity in the classroom. And then it's students saying they want complexity.
Right.
Drea, let's just turn to you for a last comment. Hearing Youth Voices, the group that you're helped to organize and lead New London, did a statewide survey. Hundreds of students indicated they wanted more classes addressing these issues. Administrators might be getting nervous now, worried about getting an email or a call from a reporter. Maybe we should back away. What would be your advice to education and building leaders at this moment about what students need from them?
Yeah, so my advice would just be, one, be open to listening, because once you have that pressure, it could be real easy to have that defense start building up, and we can sense that as students. We can sense when you're uncomfortable with the topic and when you don't want to necessarily address or talk about something. So I would just say be completely honest with how your knowledge, the extent of your knowledge, because I wouldn't try and I would let them know that you support them, I guess. That you are gonna have their backs in these meetings. And if you are offered a seat at the table, be an active voice for your students. That's what I recommend.
Great. Thank you so much, Drea. So an active voice, reaching out, affirming. Tenzin, could we ask you the same from your perspective at Naugatuck? When school comes back, what are you going to be looking for from your teachers and principals and others?
Yeah. For just some context, at my school this January, when racist and violent threats were made against my Black peers, and my school reacted to these events by creating spaces for racial discussion, students often voiced exactly what they wanted, and how that translated to was building administration reinterpreting it. So while there were these conversations and they were actively asking, oh, what do you want? And after students voiced it, they kept on asking it because it didn't fit what they needed to work based in the society we live in. So I guess what students are looking for in teachers is that willingness to amplify and listen to those voices unfiltered. Because when you remove the students from the demands, that's when you could reinterpret it so that it is more palatable. So yeah, I'm sorry if that was all jumbled.
Oh, I appreciate that, Tenzin, and also just mentioning that experiences that happen at Naugatuck, that you all had to address and the kind of crisis that was there. Thank you. So Drea and Tenzin, so great to hear your perspectives, and we encourage folks who have questions to share them in the chat with Jenny Enki-Diaz, and we'll have some time in the end. We're going to turn now to Jorgieliz and welcome you in. Hi, Jorgieliz.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you? Okay, so I'll start with the first question for you, just to share your perspective as a parent. You know, we've been talking to folks about, like, what is it proactively that you want, what the kind of vision of the kind of education for your child to receive. You're also, you know, a graduate of NHPS Public Schools, have been involved in New Haven Promise. So what's your perspective as a parent about what education should be doing for your student and every student?
Of course, I honestly am a believer that racism is embedded into legal systems and sometimes even policies. And some of these policies are really old policy that generations and generations have been following. And so they no longer see it in that kind of way. Sometimes people don't notice these things. And so the way to address these things is literally by challenging and changing the system. And we've been doing this, but sometimes fear stops it. And as a parent, my son is very young. He's a male, of course, of color. And so I am very particular about the way he is taught. I enforce very honest conversations with him. So when they did their Black History Month lesson, I specifically reached out to his teacher and I was like, you can be very honest with my son about racism and segregation and all that, the topics that you're going to be discussing, because I want him to know the realities of the world. When I look back as a student, I took a history course and I loved it. I had a wonderful teacher who was definitely aware of different systematic things that we would have experienced without knowing, but there was still a bit of a disconnect because I would learn about specific things in history. And then when I entered college, and I got into the nitty gritty of things, some of it was just like, well, why wasn't I taught this in high school? Why did they kind of sugarcoat it? Why didn't they give the full view of what has really happened in the past and how it has impacted the way that things are set up today and the way that we react or do certain things? Processes are even impacted by this.
Thank you for, sharing that. And it's funny because SEJ works with students every day. And some of our member meetings, when we discuss, various topics, they share a similar frustration for not having been taught in school some of the things that we discuss, during our meetings and workshops. And so, yeah, it can be incredibly frustrating to know that you spent all this time in a classroom and you've been taught something that's not entirely true or is, totally skewed towards, basically to support, white supremacy and institutional racism. But as Dan noted, there have been a number of attacks on critical race theory. As a parent, what is something that you would want to say to teachers or school leaders, or what do you think they need to know in terms of, your support for this work and anti-racist teaching in general?
Okay. So I guess there's two. One, over time, you will get more parents who are, and I think it's hard when the majority doesn't have a voice to hear them when a smaller group you're getting complaints or you're probably being pressured into not doing what you really want to do to show our history. So over time, you will receive more parents who are like me, who will speak up, who will tell you, please continue to do what you're doing. And I want my child to know what it was really like and what it really is going to be like when they become an adult. To turn the eyes kind of to act like it doesn't exist, and it does exist, and it's happening every day. This isn't just unique to America. This has happened in other countries, but it's more about the way that we've addressed it that is unique. Some things don't stick. Fear stops progress. Sometimes people get defensive. It's not about grouping people between oppressed and oppressor. It's about addressing these things that have created over time a lot of damage, and even some things that have not been reversible. It's important that we create that safe space in the classroom to teach these things, but also to know that there are folks who are supporting you. I wish I had learned about Shirley Chisholm. I wish I had learned about Sonia Sanchez when I was in high school, and I didn't get the chance to. And now when I feel like I have an educator who shares that vision with me to give my son nothing but the truth in regards to the history of the country where he has been born and will be raised in, I want to support that educator, and I want to make sure that they're able to know that what they're doing is much more greater than just this lesson plan that's maybe one or two parents are challenging. It's much more important than you probably imagine. So just getting the support and knowing that even though we're kind of quiet in the schools, we're definitely there and supporting it.
Great. Jorgieliz, thank you so much. I mean, just for reminding that there is a large constituency and community of parents that not only want to affirm and defend, but really want schools to go further, again, in engaging in honesty, in honest, complex, difficult conversations, and believe that the students deserve that, the families and parents deserve that. So thank you so much. It's so like just important point. Rashanda, should we turn now to Meredith?
Yes. Meredith, thank you for joining us. As a longtime educator and education leader, can you talk about the goals you have for your students when it comes to teaching and learning about race and racism?
Sure. So the funny thing about going last on a panel is that, you know, mostly I sit here wanting to just say, well, everyone said everything great, and I don't need to say anything additional. I think Daisha's representation on her slide of the kinds of things we look for in the classroom are, I would just, you know, echo that. But what I would add is a different framework for this a little bit. So I would say that my goals, or our goals as a school at New Haven Academy, and I think, you know, in other work that I've done too, is really, it has to be framed through our mission. Everything does. So it was funny, Tenzin made reference to not being able to reduce this history to bullet points on a board. And I would hope that none of my teachers are reducing anything they teach to bullet points on a board, other than for a brief moment of introduction. So our mission, for example, at our school is two parts. We're trying to prepare all of our students to be successful in college, and we're trying to prepare them all to be active, contributing citizens and to fight for social justice. And what I would argue is that this work is absolutely a fundamental piece of that. You can't do either of those things without that. So you can't be a fully participating, and I mean citizen with a small c, you know, member of your community or this country without knowing this history in its full complexity. And you also can't be successful in college without knowing it. So this is really both about the greater good for our collective community, and it's also about empowering every single individual student that I have, no matter what it is that they are you know, aspiring to do, because I can't name a field where a student wouldn't benefit in their future work from knowing this part of our country's history and the systems in which we operate deeply. So I think my goal there is the same as my goal for everything that we do.
Wonderful. Have another question. If you heard from parents about the ways that New Haven Academy teachers are addressing race and racism in the class, how might you respond? And what would you hope to communicate in such a conversation?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk today, a lot of great ideas about the kinds of things we need to say. And I think what I want to add to the conversation is that I think it would be my role as a building leader to sort of hold those parents to the same level of rigor that I'm holding my students to and my teachers to. And by that, I mean, I want to ask some follow-up questions. So you say you're concerned about something that we're teaching or that you heard that we're teaching. Tell me more. right? So what are your concerns? What is it you think you're worried about? What is it you think we're teaching? You know, if it's that you heard something about critical race theory, what does that mean to you? What are your ideas about our curriculum? What concerns you? Because if I can unpack that a little bit more, I can address those concerns more directly. My goal at the end of the day is still going to be to defend what we do, because I think we've thought long and hard about the work that we do and the curriculum that we teach. But if a parent can say, you know, if it's I don't know, if it's a white parent who's saying, I'm worried that my child is going to feel bad or be made to feel guilty, that's one thing that I need to address. If they say, I'm worried that you are indoctrinating my child, that's a different thing that I need to address. If a parent is saying, or a student is saying, I'm not getting the full picture of history and I want more, I need to know more about what they mean by that. So I think that asking back, I think that in this conversation nationally, we are letting, we're making a lot of assumptions and sort of letting the folks who are objecting get off easy. Like we're filling in the blanks for them and doing our talking without asking them to sort of defend and unpack this criticism that they're raising. So that's important to me. I think the other thing is that I will always frame back to parents what we're doing by the nature of our pedagogy too. So, you know, on no subject are our teachers in our building indoctrinating or talking at the students the way, you know, it is built into the description of how we do business that it's all about active learning and critical thinking. So what that means is that we are giving your students primary source documents. We're giving them a range of perspectives. We're giving them, we're asking them to ask questions as much as we are asking them to answer them. And very often in a history class, we say that you're going to leave with more questions than you came in with, and that that's part of the work. I think the word complexity has come up over and over and over again today. And that is the business of this work. And that is also, again, I mean, you know, when I come back to sort of what parents want, that is also how we're preparing your child for college, and it's also how we're preparing your child for the world. It's all very complex, so.
Thanks, Meredith. Such like layered advice. So here's just one last question before we, you know, get folks together for the Q&A. There's so much uncertainty heading back into school this fall after a year of uncertainty. And many building leaders are probably, you know, they're just doing everything they can to keep their head up. And they might see, I just, you know, the critical race theory, I just want it to go away. What's the advice? You know, we've heard this in different things, but kind of as you know, like peer to peer, what's the advice here about what needs to be done to support, especially the parents, teachers, and students we've heard from?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a few things. I think first of all, I hope this goes without saying, but maybe it doesn't. And certainly I realize I speak from the luxury of being in a small school and one that I helped to found and one that is mission driven, and that's not, the job is not the same in every building. So I get that. However, I think being as informed as we can be as building leaders about the particulars of what our teachers are teaching, so really knowing the curriculum deeply. And then frankly, I think as building leaders, we should never be asking a teacher to do the work alone of defending themselves. That is not how we do business. You know, that is a conversation you need to have and support as a building leader. I would never put a teacher in a room with a parent alone and say, this teacher has, you know, this parent has concerns, have at it. That is something that we need to do, you know, together. I think the other thing is that, you know, going into this fall, I think it's just a question of knowing, just sort of reiterating with staff why we do the work that we do. I was, you know, in our building, we work with a program called Facing History in Ourselves, and someone made reference earlier, I think it was Daisha made reference to PD for all teachers. And really, again, I mean, sort of as I said about the students, I kind of think, I mean, I'm biased, I'm a history teacher by training originally, but I do think that like every teacher in the United States needs to know this history in order to teach in the United States, no matter what community you teach in. So I think bringing teachers, you know, I think the other way to support our teachers is to, you know, it was sort of said earlier, give them the space and the opportunities in a structured way in the school day to collaborate and build alliances among them, and also just understand each other's rooms. I mean, I think we have to we can't get sucked into our teaching silos where maybe a couple of colleagues in our department understand what we do. I think we need to be having these conversations across our buildings. You know, it's not just history, like doing anti-racist work is not history curriculum. It is the work that we do no matter what community we're in and no matter who our students are. So I think I answered your question. I know I said a lot.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what you said and reiterate that, yeah, this isn't about like teaching history. It can, anti-racist teaching could and should span across the entire curriculum, whether that's math or science or, you know, and so that's important to note.
And I just want to say, Rashanda, like that, and I know you know this, but I just want to say too that that's not about like token appearances of folks of color during certain times of the year in highlighted reports on mathematicians of color or whatever, right? Like those things can have value, but it's so much deeper than that. I think we have to know that students can, I mean, Tenzin said it, students can handle the complexity, they want it. Teachers can handle the complexity, you know, and I think parents almost underestimate their own kids when they worry that they can't.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And your passion just resonates. I think at this time, Dan, do we want to move into some questions from our audience?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Jenny has some questions queued up. We're going to bring everyone in the panel back, and we'll turn it over to Jenny to choose the first question and see where it's directed in our last 15 minutes here.
Wonderful.
Sure. So the first question is directed to Meredith. It's about, sorry, let me scroll back. Can Meredith provide an example of how she might respond to a parent saying, "I'm concerned about CRT being indoctrination"? How have you responded specifically?
So I can't say how I have in the past. I've never gotten that question. I would say what I would say, first of all, I think the conversation about CRT is such an interesting one because like no one in the country is teaching CRT in high school and middle school. Like it's really not happening. I mean, critical race theory specifically, I mean, maybe now they will, because now I know my students are going to come in this fall and be like, we want to learn about critical race theory because this is what everyone's talking about. But I think we need to first just sort of unpack, like, what are we really talking about? What is the particular thing that you're concerned that we're teaching? And then what I would do is be completely transparent with the parent about the way, like what we teach and how we teach it. So there may be an opportunity. We've had a school open house where we invite parents to come sit in classes. We've had a parent, you know, our curriculum that we do most directly in curriculum for this work is Facing History in Ourselves. And we've had a parent night where they do curriculum from Facing History in Ourselves. And sometimes it's led by students and sometimes we've led it. And we, you know, I think really helping them to see how we do what we do is very disarming because we're not just like pushing anything at kids. We're giving them access to the true sources and letting them, you know, wrestle with them. And I find it much more unusual for a parent to argue with that when they know that that's the honest answer.
Thanks, Meredith. Do we have another question, Jenny, to go to?
Yes, we have a for Meredith. Our question is, as a building leader, how do you manage the admin or teacher who is opposed to implementing anti-racist teachings?
Well, you know, I mean, I think, so again, I'm stammering a little bit because I have had the luxury in my career of never being in a building where I've inherited staff. I've got to pick them. And so for one thing, I think that when we hire, we make sure that it is clear that that is the ethos of our building. Julia Webb, who I'm giving a shout out to, is the principal at Elm City Montessori, has done powerful, powerful work around, you know, having her whole staff. And the way that she describes it is like, this is the work, this is who we are, this is what we do. And there isn't any opting out. And she, you know, it's just sort of, we can't be an interdistrict magnet school without doing anti-racist work. That's part of what we are designed to do. And it's been our mission from the beginning. So that is not a very adequate answer to the question, only because it presupposes kind of the conditions in which I operate. So I know that there are folks in my position in other buildings who've had a harder time with that. I think though, again, it would just sort of be pushing back and saying, you know, a school culture in which everyone can thrive and in which we are preparing students for the world and a diverse world has to incorporate anti-racist teaching. And now let's talk about what that can look like and where you can find your entry point, reluctant teacher. I don't know.
Great. Thanks. I have a question here, Jenny, for Tenzin and Andrea, which is really about, like, you talked about the importance of school leaders and educators listening to students, and that just often doesn't happen, even when you try. So how do you try to, like, what do you do in those conditions? And maybe, Andrea, for you, this would be a chance to talk about how Hearing Youth Voices organizes, and Tenzin, how the Naugatuck Equity Alliance, like, what are you trying to do collectively to make sure that your voices are heard? Do you want to start, Tenzin, and then we can go to Andrea?
Sure. So I guess that would be making instances where we provide students with voices more regular and seem less like a special occasion, a one-off, as I think someone else said it earlier in the meeting. But yeah, just making sure that it's well established that there are, like, for example, at our school, something that was starting up was having forums where students could go to and actually voice their concerns, and it operated on a monthly basis, not whenever a crisis broke out. And I think that's very important because it establishes that we're doing this because we actually want to hear your voice, not to save face, because that's what it felt like at some points. So yeah, just making sure that it's a regular and consistent effort to communicate to students that you are genuinely invested and care for what the students have to say.
Thanks. Go ahead, Drea.
Okay, so for me, at least the school that I attend, that's where we're very lackluster at listening to the students and actually hearing the voices. So my org has put out a lot of surveys. One of the surveys is specifically about the collective. Got over 800 responses within the first 4 weeks of it being put out. And we do a lot of community organizing, like just door knocking, phone call, phone banking, in person, just asking them, what do you think what do you think needs to be fixed in New London, talking to our community members so that we know as an organization what the type of work that we should be trying to do. One of the things that we're doing right now is trying to get a program that was kind of railroaded by Palante. It's called, they do circle work in school, where conflict resolution, where instead of sending a child to ADP or suspending them, they will have one-on-ones with the teacher and or other students, obviously with a person who's trained in like conflict resolution work, to one, talk out whatever conflict there is, and also, sorry, that's my cat, resolve any like issues. Just it's an effective way to talk out problems. And again, my school was very lackluster in that area, but my point is there are examples that are actively in play, like Holyoke High School, of ways to practice conflict resolution and resolving these things and having these conversations, a way to have these conversations because they're being had.
Thanks to you both. So I hear from Tenzin about just not waiting till a crisis comes, but proactive.
Yeah.
And Drea talked about really sustained efforts. There's youth organizing groups all over the state, the Black and Brown Student Union, Hearing Youth, Students for Education Justice, so many. Jenny, do we have another question?
Yeah, we have a couple for the teacher panelists. So I'll say them both, and feel free to jump in with your answers. The first one is, do you have any suggestions for teaching anti-racism in elementary schools? And then the second question is, how do you encourage some educators who think they're already enlightened and that nothing needs to change with their curriculum, especially in the arts?
Well, I guess
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I have something very short to say. I'm a high school teacher. You work with older students also, but I'm married to an elementary school teacher. And in terms of language learners and immigrant students, I can say the most effective model and the most equitable model for teaching those students is definitely a dual language model. And maybe I'm nerding out a little bit about my specific field, but there's a lot of back and forth still to this day around Connecticut and around our country about like what is the model that works best for students who are learning a new language when they're younger. And it's very clear that dual language, where you have half, let's say, kids who speak Spanish, half kids who speak English, they're in class together, they're learning both languages throughout the grades. We know that model works for those kids and is hugely empowering for everyone, and helps make a multilingual society. But there's constantly a battle about it. It's hard to do well, and it requires a lot of resources and people with specific skills, so it doesn't happen enough in Connecticut. So that's my partial answer to the part about elementary school.
And I guess just to follow up with that, I'm a high school teacher, but I think the one thing I can say is that this doesn't, I don't see this as necessarily having an age requirement. I think a lot of times, especially in those younger ages, I think a lot of times people will either just try not to talk about it, or they'll kind of like make it into something that I kind of think about a lot of times when I ask my students about their elementary school days, they'll talk about Christopher Columbus's song. So kind of making sure that you're still being accurate, that you're kind of like, you're not trying to age base it too much where it becomes a lie. So I think that would be my one advice. To the second question about teachers who think that they are enlightened or that the curriculum doesn't need anymore, I think the first thing is that's just bad teaching. We are all supposed to be lifelong learners. We're all supposed to be going on along with this. We should always be seeking out more ways to develop our curriculum, more ways. And I think especially when it comes down to history in particular, history is so vast. There's always a new topic to talk about. There's not a lack of history that can be updated. So that would be my response to that.
Jorgieliz, did you want to go there?
Yes, actually, I had a pretty great my son is entering first grade, so he was in kindergarten this past school year, and they asked permission to teach him a gun safety course. There was a video along with it, and I received a permission slip, and I received the actual video they showed the students, and the teacher messaged me directly, and she was like, for next week's lesson, we have a gun safety course that we're going to be doing. I just want you to review what I'm going to show them and then just return the form back to me if it's okay with you. And I of course I said it's okay. There's a lot that's going on. And one of the biggest things about me is making sure my son is aware and always being safe. And so I didn't really get much pushback or anything in regards to his age. And I think it's an important foundation for him to start as early as possible, being aware with an array of things. And so I did message the teacher and I was like, you probably got some parents that had pushback, and I just want you to know that you need to continue doing it. The way that you did it to ask for permission first was very perfect. It was flawless. I didn't feel like this would even come up because I didn't think there would be other parents who would push back in the way that she did receive pushback, his teacher. And so I told her it is definitely something that families will have their different beliefs on, but you decided to teach them something that was very important. And I absolutely needed that for my son. And I'm really grateful that you took the time to add this into your curriculum. So this is just one example of how teachers are doing things that make other parents uncomfortable, and how you can still teach what you need to teach. and making sure that your lesson is just aware. It's not going to put a student in an uncomfortable situation. It is simply going to teach history. My mom always said, when you have two shoes that are untied and you only tie one and you leave the other one without tying it, you're going to continue to trip on the other one. And if you continue to trip on it, you're going to have to get a new shoelace eventually. It's going to break. And so this is how I like to look at certain situations. When you address one half of it and you ignore the other half of it, there's always more, especially in aftermath to it.
Thank you. So just taking a look at the clock, we do have a number of questions that just kind of came in at the last minute in the chat, and I apologize that we're not going to be able to get to all of them. I just want to take a minute and ask all of our panelists in about 30 seconds or less if there are any like final parting words or advice that you'd like to give to our listeners. And I also want to note that as people are leaving, others have asked if the video will be made available, and it will be posted on the collective's website, the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective. So you can catch whatever you missed there. And with that, I will start with Meredith. Any closing words or pieces of advice?
You know, I just want to circle us back to the complexity that Andrea and Tenzin asked for, and that, you know, our students can, just to reiterate that our students can handle more than we think they can at all ages. And also, I guess, to echo what Daisha said about teachers have to be lifelong learners. And that also means that schools and school systems have to give them opportunities to do that. It's not just something they need to do in their free time. It's something that should be built into the work, those opportunities too.
Daisha?
Sorry, I'm not sure, last slide, sorry, I made it into a slide. But I think the first thing is just to remember, for teachers who are on this thing, just to remember your job is not to cure the world, but to really make critical thinkers, just quoting from bell hooks, really helping our students to achieve the practice of freedom. And then really quickly, I just wanted to mention this, I've been thinking about this entire conversation. It reminds me of Carol Anderson. She wrote a book called White Rage, and when she discussed how almost every big major piece of legislation was followed by some sort of backlash, whether that be Brown versus Board or the election of Barack Obama. And so I just think it's really important to keep in mind that we're not in unprecedented territory in that respects, in terms of this pushback. And to just keep on fighting on, you know, just stay in the fight, and we'll keep going, but always keep that in mind too. So that would just be my last words.
Thank you. Drea?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that one, I kind of want to highlight the fact that children understand a lot more than we tend to give them credit for. My experience typically extends for being the oldest of three children. I've watched both of my brothers grow into, they're still growing into young men, but I've watched them grow, I've watched them develop. I've read books to them, I've had them read books to me, and I've seen how it is they learn and they educate. And my brother, despite only being 9, has been seeing what's been going on in the world and has been looking for an outlet to release some of his frustrations on what he sees as injustices. Children know fair from unfair. They know right from wrong. And although they're in the process of learning, they know when they see something that, hey, that's not right. They know right from wrong enough to be able to understand these complex conversations that definitely need to be had. And in my opinion, the younger the conversations are started to be had, the better. I was taught these things in my family since I was old enough to understand thought. These are lessons that I have learned in my personal life. And the only difference that would have been is that I would be learning these lessons both in school and at home, growing up in the education system. That would just be the only difference.
Yeah.
I know there are families who teach their own histories within the household.
Yeah. Whether you acknowledge it in the classroom or not, these are experiences that children have, and they recognize them. Jorgieliz?
If there are any other parents here, I really want to say to be open and not be defensive. It is a huge shock when you go out into the real world and you realize you missed half of the history. And for me, I went to a school that was diversifying when I was a freshman. So teaching my fellow peers about, things that they really didn't know, and they didn't come from schools that were diverse, it's kind of, for them, just seeing the surprise on their faces is a little sad because someone along the way didn't give them, unfortunately for some of them, the ugly truth about our history, or what the result of every triumph was. I think sometimes we have big victories and people try to use them as a way to cover up other issues that need to be addressed. So if you're a parent, please allow your student to just learn the reality of the world and how things work in the world as well.
Thank you. Tenzin?
Yeah, so to teachers and anyone else pushing for this, I say to keep fighting for an anti-racist education system. As a student of color, there's something inspiring in seeing educators mobilizing to address white supremacy in our schools and by extension our society. So I say keep fighting.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Chris?
I would say there was a question earlier in the chat about, it sounded like that person was feeling like they were kind of going it alone in their community. And I would say if you are feeling that way, it's good you're here. Like find your team, even if it's like your one partner in crime at work who you can really kind of scheme with a little bit and see where you can make inroads, even if they feel really small at first. And I would say, especially to white teachers like me who are working in an urban setting or working with predominantly students of color, like where are the places where you can, where you have the mic and you can kind of pass it on directly to the students or directly to the community. I mean, we at Wilbur Cross, we work with C4D, Connecticut Students for a Dream, and over the years that has really been what that partnership has been. It's like we take a little more space and we give it directly back over to the students, leading PDs with the staff and things like that. But it's okay to start small. Like that partnership started really small.
Wonderful. And I just want to add, if there are any young people, students on the call, other than our amazing panelists, there are many organizations throughout the state that work with the collective. As noted, Andrea is in New London and works with Hearing Youth Voices. Tenzin, I believe your organization, can you tell us?
Naugatuck Equity Council, yeah.
Yes, Naugatuck Equity Council. Students for Educational Justice, Hearing Youth Voices, Citywide Youth Coalition, Connecticut Students for a Dream. There are a lot of us out here. So connect with your local organization or reach out to any of us if you want more information. And we will have the resources that were shared in the chat available on the website, along with the recording of this video.
Great. Thanks everyone, to all the panelists, Rashanda. This is a lot of fun, huh? Once again. Yeah. Co-hosting this. I learned so much. I'm going to just send us out here. We've been putting resources in the panel all the time. There's some national organizations, the Zinn Education Project, Black Lives Matter at School, and the African American Policy Forum that are planning national days of action. So for those kind of wondering about that question Chris just said about, connecting with like-minded folks, those resources in the chat, they'll be in our newsletter coming forward. A wonderful national campaign called Truth Be Told that's been tracking this legislation collaboration across the country, but also helping educators, building leaders, students to build the connections and solidarity to resist. So lots and lots of support and resources, and across our own state as well. Please sign up for the ARTLC newsletter, and also the link we sent out to get more involved. We're so grateful. We learned so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Go in for a little bit so people get those chats. But good night, everyone.
Good night.